President Trump will discuss the White House Middle East peace deal with Netanyahu and Gantz today and present it at noon tomorrow. Could this be the prophesied peace agreement that will start the final 7 years? Well, we will discuss this new developments and what the Bible prophesies for the future on today's edition of End of the Age. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. Thank you for joining me on this edition of End of the Age. And it's one of the most recognizable prophecies in Scripture. And that's a peace agreement that will start the final 7 years to the Battle of Armageddon. Will Trump's peace agreement be the one? We don't know that at this point. Of course, we'll be scouring it tomorrow once it's released, but there's a lot of new developments, and we're going to go through some of those today. Now, you might be asking yourself, where's Irvin Baxter? Well, he traveled last week. He came back in town this week, and his wife had to have an outpatient surgery today, I think about 12:30, 1 o'clock, and so he wanted to be there with her, and it's totally understandable. So I'll be covering today and tomorrow. Irvin will be back on the air on Wednesday, probably to go through all of the peace agreement with you. So just wanted to let you know where he's at. He's not sick, not feeling down or anything. He just wanted to be with his wife today when she had surgery. So remember Judy in your prayers, that God would be with her. And I know he is, but remember them in your prayers as well. Now, the peace deal. Netanyahu says that he and Donald Trump will make history this week. If they were to get a peace deal signed, that would absolutely be true. And we may be starting the process of that. Israel Hayam reports that Israel's current regional status and its economic, diplomatic, and military clout allow it to advance a strategic and even historic initiatives it could only have dreamed of in the past. What's going on right now, I hope you realize, is totally unprecedented. The United States has close and positive relationships with the majority of Arab states. Up until in all the previous administrations and their peace initiatives, it's been the Palestinians and the Israelis. Drag them to the negotiating table and try to get something done. But it hadn't worked because the Arab states weren't on board. The Palestinians could just fall back and say, my Arab brethren won't let me. The Arab initiative can't do this. Well, now many of the Arab states are on board, and that could be the key to getting something done. They're willing to help push the peace plan forward. And it's been reported in the past that these states are pressuring the Palestinians to temper their rejectionist position. America's stance with them against Iran has only increased their commitment to it. So these Arab states, they know they need the United States and Israel and their protection against their Sunni Arab nations. They need protection against Iran, which is a Shia Arab nation. So they said, hey, Palestinians, we need the U.S. and we need Israel, so you guys better get on board with this. You remember back when I-24 News reported, and many other news sources, back in 2018, in late April of that year, during his trip to the United States, that Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, that he slammed the Palestinian leadership in a closed-door meeting with heads of Jewish organizations in New York, according to the Israeli Channel 10, and he said, and I quote, he said, in the last several decades, the Palestinian leadership has missed one opportunity after the other and rejected all the peace proposals it was given. It's about time the Palestinians take the proposals and agree to come to the negotiation table or shut up and stop complaining. So you can see there's definitely some unprecedented things going on here with the Arab nations pressuring the Palestinians to get on board with this. And I have to say, a lot of people have said, well, the Palestinians aren't going to participate in this. We don't have to worry about them. Well, you do realize that the Palestinians over the last week or so talked to both Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, and Emmanuel Macron, the leader of France, about the peace deal. He talked to them both while they were there for the Holocaust celebration and the Holocaust remembrance ceremony that they had. And so the Palestinians may be more on board than what they're letting on. Now, the Jerusalem Post, they recorded, and this is very important because this Arab initiative behind all of this is extremely important. Michael Oren said that every time the Palestinians were offered peace, they said no. And Donald Trump and them knew that going into this back in the early part of 2017. Israel's former ambassador to the United States told Fox News that the deal of the century is aimed at two customers, really. The Israelis and the Sunni Arab world. And man, is he right. I mean, if you can get the Arabs behind this, pressuring the Palestinians to get something done, we just might have a peace deal, folks, and get something across the finish line this time. Totally unprecedented, and it's actually time on God's prophetic timeline for this to occur. So will we be watching it over the next few days? Better believe we will.
About our trip, it was a wonderful experience. We totally enjoyed the time spent with other believers, worshiping and experiencing the places where Christ walked. One of our favorites was being on Mount Moriah, where the Holy of Holies are, the Dome of the Spirit. And the teachings that Brother Baxter did was so enlightening. It was so much to take in. It will take us another month or two to really grasp the full extent of the knowledge we received on this trip. Our tour guide in Israel was fantastic. He was very knowledgeable. I think God chose him just for us. Thanks, Jana. Our lives will never be the same. We will try to do this tour again. Mike and Julie L., Cayman Islands.
Join us May 1st through May 16th, 2020, for a trip to the wonderful land of Israel and the Holy Roman Empire reborn.
We've seen Bible prophecy fulfilled like never before. From the halls of the United Nations to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, Endtime Ministries continues to reveal the Bible prophecy in the news headlines around the world every day. Whether it's through our broadcast or online at our Jerusalem Prophecy College, your gifts enable us to put vital materials in the hands of those who need it most. Because of you, we continue to replace fear with faith in the hearts of Christians around the world. We will continue to see prophecy come to pass at an even swifter pace. We need your support. Your donation of any amount enables us to continue to broadcast and be a voice in the ever-growing censored media. To become a partner or give a one-time gift, visit endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME right now. That's 800-363-8463. Go online now. Visit endtime.com.
So Michael Oren told Fox News, and I'm quoting, he said, "It's a new day, and this peace plan is aimed at really two customers, the Israeli public and the moderate Arab Sunni world, especially the Gulf states." He said, and so far the reactions have been very good. He said that the head of Israel's major parties are engaged in the process, referring to Gantz and Netanyahu's respective meetings with Donald Trump today, which have already taken place. And then he said, in the Arab world, this president's administration has a tremendous amount of street credit for its strong stance against Iran, pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. He said it's very strong credit. And then the Israeli National News reported that Oren said, for example, in the beginning, there was concern among administration officials that the outline would have to be acceptable to the Palestinian side, the outline of the peace deal. He said, I told them, forget it. the word yes does not exist in the Palestinian vocabulary. They never said yes, not to the United Nations, not to the Brits, and not to anyone else. He said, I explained that anyone who conditions the process on a Palestinian agreement condemns it to failure, and said that the outline should be directed at the majority of the Israeli public and the majority of the Sunni Arab world, including the Gulf states. And he said, I think this approach was accepted. Well, I can tell you it absolutely was. Where did Donald Trump first go when he was elected? His first trip overseas, Saudi Arabia, and to many other Sunni Arab nations, especially along the Gulf there. Where did Jared Kushner roll out the economic portion of the peace plan last June? Bahrain, one of the Gulf nations. So it appears the Trump administration may rely on the Arab nations to influence the Palestinians to negotiate a deal. And Trump said today he thinks he will ultimately have the support of the Palestinians, who really thus far have opposed the plan sight unseen, and that many Arab nations have already agreed to it. This is very, very important. This is never, in past negotiations, like I said, it's broken down at this point, where a lot of times they've said, no, we've got to go by the Arab initiative. This isn't going to work. We're done. And this time the Arab nations are on board pushing them. The Jerusalem Post said there's a growing fear with Palestinians that countries such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt are not opposed to Trump's plan, and that the Palestinians are worried that some of the Arab leaders will have them to face the Trump administration on their own. So the Palestinians are very, very, very concerned about this. Also, the plan is expected to include provisions for the eventual establishment of a demilitarized Palestinian state, allow East Jerusalem to be the Palestinian capital, and dismantle several dozen unauthorized settlements, their outposts. They said, but if the Palestinian Authority rejects the plan, which several officials have already said that they will, this is very key, it is possible that the Trump plan will allow Israel to go ahead and unilaterally annex portions of the West Bank outlined in the proposal. So in other words, you say, what in the world? Palestinians, if you want to negotiate, great, get on board. If not, we may go ahead and do what the plan lays out anyway. Of course, only time will tell. So in question here, and this is what we'll be looking for tomorrow. What are the contents of the deal? The final borders, sovereignty, settlements, the refugees, the Jordan Valley, Jerusalem, the Temple Mount. The list goes on and on. So what's going to happen? That's the question on all of our minds. The Bible prophesies what is ultimately going to occur. Number one, Israel's leaders will sign a peace agreement with the Palestinians, disobeying what God has explicitly instructed them to do. The prophecy stating this is given in Daniel 9:27. The passage prophesies the confirmation of the Abrahamic covenant by the Antichrist. The Abrahamic covenant is the promise of God to Abraham that the promised land will belong to him and his descendants forever. Number two, the prophecy states that this agreement will be a 7-year agreement which confirms Israel's right to exist in the promised land. It's going to be a 7-year agreement instead of a permanent agreement because one major issue will be left unresolved. Of course, a Palestinian state is going to be created in the West Bank and the area referred to it in the Bible as Judea and Samaria. There are presently 400,000 to 500,000 Jews living in the area that will become the new Palestinian state. Those Jews will be allowed to continue to live in the Palestinian state as a Jewish minority. And the logic will be that there are about 1.6 million Arabs living as an Arab minority in the Jewish state. So why shouldn't Jews be allowed to live in the Palestinian state? Well, that's what's going to happen. And Netanyahu has already stated that he's fine with that we will not uproot any of the settlements. He's talked about it many times. Number 5, the hot dispute over control of the Temple Mount is going to be settled by placing it under a sharing arrangement, and both Muslims and Jews will be allowed to worship there. And a law, many of you know this, a law has already been introduced in the Israeli Knesset calling for placing the Temple Mount under a sharing arrangement. Well, of course, scripturally, Revelation 11, 1 and 2 confirms the sharing arrangement will be implemented in the times just ahead. John was told to measure the temple and those that worship therein, but the outer court of the temple leave out because it would remain under control of the Gentiles. And the outer court is where the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque are located presently. Also, let's say number 6, the prophecy indicates the Jews will build their temple on their portion of the Temple Mount, since you obviously can't measure a temple if there's no temple to measure. And then the oversight of this sharing arrangement on the Temple Mount will be placed under international supervision, probably overseen by the United Nations. Also, the status of the city of Jerusalem will be left unresolved under this agreement. And the Palestinians say there will be no permanent peace agreement unless they have East Jerusalem as their capital. But the Israelis vow they will never surrender Jerusalem or divide it. And when all other issues have been negotiated, and this is the one last issue that remains, an agreement will be struck to implement those things that have been successfully negotiated, but to postpone negotiations concerning the final status of Jerusalem for a period of 7 years. So all of these factors of the peace agreement can be clearly understood from the prophecies given in Scripture. And these are the things that we will be looking for tomorrow once the peace plan is rolled out. I think Donald Trump's going to roll the peace plan out at 12 Eastern time, which will be obviously 11 o'clock here in Dallas. And myself, Irvin, will be pouring through that. I'll do my best to try to get through that before the program tomorrow. Can I guarantee that? No. And we'll just have to see. I mean, maybe Irvin will have to go through all that stuff on Wednesday. I don't know. I'll do the best I can. I'm committed to it. But I heard it's, 50, 60 pages long. So I don't know at this point. I haven't seen it. I'm only going off of what we've heard. So I'll just have to see. I know I'm waiting with bated breath just like the rest of you guys are. So let's talk about this, because the prophesied peace plan, I know we talked about it many times, but if you were asked to explain the peace agreement right now and why we're going to be, why it says that there's going to be a 7 years. I mean, when you go talk to your family, let's say next Thanksgiving, and you say, hey, we're in the final 7 years. If this is the peace agreement and they get it signed, could you explain that? I mean, it's very important. Once it happens, we'll be on every news station you can imagine, because we're going to send a magazine to every home in Israel. Everybody's going to want to know, why are you guys saying this? Explain it. My question to you is, can you explain it? It's a very important question. If you can't explain it, we put together a DVD that explains it in great detail. It's called The Final 7 Years, The Prophecy Explained. It goes into Daniel 9, 24 through 27 in great detail. And it helps you know it. It would be a great DVD to have to show your friends and family, your Bible studies, your church, to show them what's coming. And it's very important, because we could be doing this here just in the next few months or a year or so. You never know. So, and you can pick that up, 1-800-363-8463, or go online and order it. The Final 7 Years, The Prophecy Explained. Now, I know that many of you have asked, how can you guys prove scripturally the characteristics of the prophesied peace agreement that we talk about so often? And that's a question we've had. Why do you guys talk about this so often? Because we're fixing to enter, this prophecy is fixing to occur. And if you can't explain it to your friends and family, your sphere of influence, you're going to be walking around in a fog. Hey, we just started the final 7 years. There's 2 guys on the radio that talk about this all the time. and somebody says, I don't agree with them, prove it. And you're going to be sitting there like, start listening to Dave and Irvin on the radio. No, you need to be able to explain this to yourself. You need to be able to teach it. So how do we know that it's, number one, how do we know it's between the Israelis and the Palestinians? Well, to do that, we've got to go back 4,000 years, back to the origins of the conflict. God promised Abraham, you will have a son, and through that son shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. 25 years after that promise had been given, Abraham and his wife Sarah were still childless. But this time, by that time, Abraham was 85 years old, Sarah was 75. And their faith in God's promise began to waver a little bit. Sarah suggested to Abraham that perhaps they needed to become a little proactive. Many of y'all know the story. And she may have said something to Abraham like, hey, after all, God helps he who helps himself. So Sarah had an Egyptian handmaid named Hagar. Sarah suggested to Abraham that Hagar, that he takes her as a second wife so that Sarah could obtain children by her. Well, that did happen, and Hagar did conceive a son by Abraham and called his name Ishmael. However, and that's part of the big problem because Ishmael was the firstborn son to Abraham. However, Hagar flaunted the fact that she could not bear children and that she could and that Sarah couldn't. And that brought tremendous conflict in Abraham's family. So when Ishmael was 14 years old, Sarah finally gave birth to their son Isaac. By this time, Sarah was 90 years old. Abraham was 100 years old. And of course, what an incredible miracle right there. So there was no doubt that this was the promised child from God, Isaac. Well, a short time after that, Sarah demanded that Abraham cast out Hagar and her son from their household. She said that the son of the bondwoman should not be heir with her promised child. And she was correct. And this was of course, very painful for Abraham. But God spoke to him that he should listen to Sarah and expel Hagar and Ishmael. God promised Abraham that he would make Ishmael into a mighty nation because he was Abraham's seed. However, God emphasized to Abraham that Isaac would be the promised seed. So Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael away, and eventually Ishmael became the father of the Arab race. The child Isaac began to grow. He was the apple of Abraham's eye. He was the center of his life. And God had fulfilled his promise to Abraham, and life was good. Now, you could see Ishmael became the father of the Arab race. Isaac became the father of the Israelites eventually. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through that lineage. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. And so that same 4,000-year-old battle between Ishmael and Isaac, that continues to this very day. And you always got to remember, God's promise for Ishmael was only for a nation. God's covenant with Abraham and his descendants through Isaac was for the land. And Israel cannot illegally occupy land that legally belongs to Israel and was given to them by God. Now, that brings us to the current conflict. After World War II, and what I'm doing, I'm proving that about you. A lot of people say, well, how do you guys know it's going to be between the Israelis and the Palestinians? You got to have some background here to be able to explain that. And this DVD goes into this stuff. It's very important. So, after World War II, the guilt of standing by while 6 million Jews died moved the nations of the world to vote for the creation of the Jewish state in the land called Palestine, formerly the Holy Land. The United Nations took its famous vote November 29, 1947, to partition that area called Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Of course, the Jews, they quickly accepted the UN partition plan, even though the territory allotted the Jewish state a much smaller than the originally promised by the 1917 Balfour Declaration, and the Arabs rejected the UN partition plan outright. They vowed to wage war against the Jewish state until they had driven the Jews into the sea. And the area called Palestine had been under the authority of the British Mandate from the time of World War I. However, the British decided to wash their hands of that troubled region. They announced that the last British troops would pull out of the Palestinian region on May 14th, 1948. And this left the area without any authority in charge. Israel did the only thing it could do. They already had people there. Israel declared its independence on that same night. And the Arabs launched a war against Israel that very next day. 5 Arab armies, Egypt, Syria, Transjordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, immediately invaded Israel. And most of the world expected Israel, just a newborn state, to be wiped off the map by these superior forces and their invaders. I mean, these armies were a whole lot bigger than Israel's. But to everyone's surprise, Israel not only held her own, but actually gained territory beyond that what the United Nations Partition Resolution had provided for. And of course, the resolution had no effect since it had been totally rejected by the Arab people. So when a ceasefire was finally declared in 1949, Jordan occupied Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, all the way up to the 1967 borders, and they also controlled the eastern part of Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount. Israel controlled the western part of Jerusalem. Well, so it stayed like that all the way to 1967. And when we get back, I'll talk about 1967, what happened there, because it was huge, and it really is very important pertaining to what's happening today and the Palestinian state, the Israeli state proper that will be left in this peace agreement. You'll hear them talk about it, 1967 borders. Well, you need to understand what that's all about in explaining this prophecy.
Move Mountains with Irvin Baxter. This book by Irvin's grandson provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your relationship with God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at Endtime will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real life change. Get your book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
If ever people needed to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for Endtime magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will impact your life. Endtime has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that Endtime magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctor's offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine has done in many lives. Call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 and get your subscription today.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archive button.
So I want to mention it one more time, this DVD that we have that explains the prophecy, the final 7 years of prophecy explained. It doesn't give you so much of the history that I'm going through right now, but it goes through the final 7 years. It does tell about the prophecy, and it explains it, but then it goes through the final 7 years, what this event will be the catalyst that will launch us into. It's a very informative DVD, and it would be great for you to sit down and watch it with your friends and family, especially with what's going on this week. A very great purchase to add to your collection. So in 1967, and you'll hear about this in the Trump's peace agreement, Israel was attacked again, and after 6 days, it's a 6 days war, you've heard about it, Israel had defeated Syria in the north, Jordan in the east, and Egypt in the south. And most importantly, Jerusalem was reunified, and the Temple Mount was in Israeli hands for the first time since the Romans drove them out under General Titus all the way back in 70 A.D. It's almost 2,000 years they were in exile. They came back to 1948. Now they've got the Temple Mount, 1967. So after that, in an effort to restore peace to the region, Israel agreed to allow the Arabs who had been living in Palestine to remain in the West Bank, Gaza, and inside parts of Israel. So for centuries, Israel had fought to preserve her God-given borders, and she has tried to negotiate land for peace with her enemies, and has withdrawn from the borders that God promised to Abraham and his rightful descendants. They've been attacked repeatedly by surrounding Arab nations and has participated in Middle East peace conferences. You've heard about many of them. And has signed agreements to work toward a two-state solution with the Palestinians. So that's what I'm saying, is because you have to understand the background behind all that, the history, to understand why we say it's going to be a peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Palestinians are the one fighting for that area right now. And so this peace agreement that will be signed will be between the Palestinians and the Israelis, or the Palestinians, i.e. the Arabs that lived in that region when it was called Palestine, okay? Now, summarizing the peace agreement. Let's do that real quick because you need to be able to explain this. Daniel 9:27 prophesies the Antichrist will confirm Israel's right to exist in the Promised Land. And that peace agreement will be a 7-year temporary agreement, and it's going to be temporary because the status of Jerusalem is going to be left unresolved. So the creation of a Palestinian state in Judea, where's that found in Scripture? Well, the peace agreement is going to provide a Palestinian state in the West Bank, and historically and biblically, this area is referred to as Judea. The agreement will also allow Jews in Judea to remain as a Jewish minority under that new Palestinian state. We know this from the prophecy of Jesus in Matthew 24:15 through 18, and then verse 21. Jesus said, "When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes." Now, Jesus Christ is prophesying about something that would happen 2,000 years in the future, but for that area out there, Judea, or the modern-day West Bank. And then he says in verse 21, he says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." Well, we know from other prophecies in the Bible when that's going to occur. It's the final 3.5 years just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ and the Battle of Armageddon. So in this passage, Jesus paints a picture of the Jews living under a hostile government in Judea. When the abomination of desolation occurs, or I should say at least an autonomous situation, a self-governing situation out there, which we could see as a result of this peace agreement for the Palestinians. When the abomination of desolation occurs halfway through that final 7-year agreement, the Jews living in Judea will have to flee for their lives. They're going to be out there. The Palestinians are going to be surrounding them. And I'm hoping that they show a map in the peace agreement. I'm sure they will. I would be surprised if they didn't. They show the map of the Palestinian-controlled areas and then the settlements. I think it'll be the one that Trump revealed earlier, or that Netanyahu revealed earlier. I'm not sure. That's why I'm waiting to see the deal like the rest of you are. And this event, when they got to run for their lives, the Jews, that will launch the final 3.5 years called the Great Tribulation. The abomination of desolation is when that occurs. So amazingly, the scenario Jesus painted 2,000 years ago is exactly what is presently being discussed in the ongoing peace negotiations. And I promise you will be in the Donald Trump's peace deal, if from everything that we've read is correct. The Palestinians contend that the only hope for peace between them and Israel is a two-state solution. And that's what the international community, everybody's bought into that. And they claim that their state should be established in Judea, the West Bank, and the United States, the European Union, the United Nations pretty much all agree that the two-state solution is the only viable solution to conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. Now, Donald Trump, I don't know where we're going to land on that. We'll have to see what's in his peace deal. He said he was okay with that, but he wasn't sticking to it as a hardliner like the rest of them have. So we'll have to see how all that plays out tomorrow once we read through the agreement. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he's also really embraced the two-state solution as the ultimate answer to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, he would say now, oh no, but he has in the past. And he's a politician. And so we'll have to see. I like Netanyahu, but he's still a politician. So, we'll just have to see how all that plays out. Sometimes politicians can, things can be a little foggy. We'll just have to see when we look at the peace agreement tomorrow. So the Temple Mount is going to be shared. That's also one of the characteristics of the peace agreement, the prophesied peace agreement. How do we explain that? Well, outside of the control of Jerusalem, the status of the Temple Mount is the most hotly disputed issue in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I mean, I just finished a huge article on where were the original temples, what was the location, the biblical location of the Jewish temples. And I went through some of it here on the radio program the other day, but it was not near what's in the article. And it'll be coming out here in the next issue of the magazine. But there are a lot of people, the Palestinians especially, they deny that there was ever an a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount. They even deny it was ever in Jerusalem. They say it was in Nablus. And the Muslim Waqf that controls the Temple Mount, they deny there was ever a temple up there. And so it's very important that we be able to prove that, because that's one of Israel's big ties to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, is that, hey, they had this prior to, and that David purchased this for Israel right on down the line. So Muslims claim the Temple Mount as their third holiest site after Mecca and Medina, located in Saudi Arabia. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, they presently occupy the Temple Mount. However, the Jews regard the Temple Mount as their number one holy site. Once you read my article, you can see in great detail. All this is laid out from Abraham all the way through. And their first temple stood on the Temple Mount. The Bible tells us that specifically. I laid that out in my article. The first temple stood on the Temple Mount from 968 to 586 BC. The second temple occupied the Temple Mount from 516 BC to 70 AD. And God promised King Solomon that he would place his name there forever. Consequently, the Jews insist that their third temple must soon be built up on the Temple Mount. So how is this? It's an intractable dispute. How is that going to be over these 35 acres? It's the most disputed acreage on the planet. How's that going to be resolved under this coming peace agreement? Well, during the Camp David peace negotiations in the year 2000, Bill Clinton suggested that Muslims and Jews could just share the Temple Mount. Well, recently a law was introduced in the Israeli Knesset to place the Temple Mount under a sharing arrangement. Prime Minister Netanyahu used his influence to delay that action concerning that law, hoping the issue would be settled when a peace agreement is achieved. Now, that's a 2,000-year-old prophecy, everybody. The Bible prophesies that the Temple Mount will be shared under the coming peace agreement. The prophecy, Revelation 11, 1 and 2. And there was given unto John a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood and said, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple, leave it out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months. It's talking about the time of the duration of the Great Tribulation. So the temple's going to be built during the first 3.5 years. And this sharing arrangement is what's going to take place. And this is what John was said to measure for 42 months. They shall tread the city underfoot for 42 months. That's what it's referring to, the Great Tribulation. John was instructed to measure the temple and those that worship therein. Then he was told, don't measure the outer court because it'll be trodden down of the Gentiles. So this scripture paints a picture of the Temple Mount being shared between Jew and Gentile. And the scene in this prophecy described the Temple Mount again during the 42 months of the final 42 months of the 7-year agreement. This is how we know that the Temple Mount will be placed under a sharing arrangement in the upcoming peace agreement. That's one of the characteristics to the prophesied peace agreement. So the Jewish temple is going to be rebuilt. So how do we know that? Well, in Revelation again, in 11, 1 and 2, I just read it, John was told to measure the temple. Well, you can't measure a temple if there's no temple to measure. He was told to do that when there would be 42 months left. So it lets us know that the Jewish temple has to be built and completed during the first 3.5 years of the 7-year agreement. So the agreement, if they started building their third temple today, we'd be in World War III tomorrow afternoon. So it has to be after the peace agreement during that first 3.5 years. 2 Thessalonians 2:4 confirms this. It says that the Antichrist will sit in the temple of God at the time of the abomination of desolation, which will occur halfway through that final 7-year period. You can't sit in a temple if there's no temple to sit in. And again, that proves that the Jewish temple will be completed during the first 3.5 years of that final 7-year period. So if you think this peace agreement isn't important, it's absolutely crucial we find out what it is, because it's going to be the catalyst that will launch us into this final 7-year period. I mean the final 7 years to the second coming of Jesus Christ in the Battle of Armageddon. I can't wait for this. And so, are we excited about the rollout of the peace agreement tomorrow? You better believe we are. I can't wait to read it, and I know you can't either. Should come about sometime around noon Eastern time tomorrow.
Does the book of Revelation frighten you? Do its symbols confuse you? For centuries, the book of Revelation has been misunderstood and misinterpreted. In Revelation, the unveiling of Jesus Christ, Volume 1, Irvin Baxter unlocks the mystery of the book of Revelation with in-depth analysis and commentary like you've never heard before. This 10-part definitive DVD series and 268-page comprehensive commentary book covers the first 12 chapters of the book of Revelation, featuring on-location photography, classic artwork, and symbolic illustrations. You'll walk away with complete understanding and peace about the events happening during the final years on Earth. These comprehensive study tools, available for $299, will deepen your biblical understanding as you dig into the original intent of the book, answering the mysterious prophecies and symbols of the book of Revelation. Don't miss this special offer. Call now, 1-800-ENDTIME, or go to endtime.com to order. Call or go online now to get this comprehensive Bible study.
So, of course, once Israel builds her third temple, she's going to want to resume animal sacrifices just like they did in the Old Testament. I mean, she hadn't been able to do this since the tearing down of the second temple in 70 A.D. So they've waited almost 2,000 years for this. So what's going to happen? Animal sacrifices will be conducted and then stopped. These are the characteristics of the peace agreement, the prophesied peace agreement. Once the Jewish temple is completed Animal sacrifices will be resumed as they were by the Jews in the Old Testament. We know that because in Daniel 9:27, that prophecy foretelling the final 7 years, it states that the Antichrist, in the middle of the 7 years, will cause the sacrifices to stop. Well, you can't stop the sacrifices if they're not already ongoing, right? And then Daniel 11:31, it also records the Antichrist stopping the sacrifices. It says, "And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate." So, the Antichrist is then going, he stops the sacrifices prior to, then the Antichrist is going to commit the abomination of desolation. And this is in Daniel 9:27. I'm walking through Daniel 9:27 here. The abomination of desolation. In order to justify stopping the Jewish sacrifices, the Antichrist is going to offer his reason for doing so. He's going to remind the world that most people have come to agree that all religions really worship the same God, which is it's a lie. All religions do not worship the same God. Don't ever believe that. But the Antichrist is going to claim that, and he's going to say they merely call him by different, we all worship the same God, we just call him by different names. Then he's going to go a step further. The Antichrist is going to remind the different religions that most of them are expecting an anointed leader to appear. Jews are looking for their Messiah. Christians are looking for the second coming of Jesus. Muslims believe the Mahdi will soon come. Buddhists are expecting the fifth Buddha. The Antichrist is then going to claim that he is the anointed one the different religions have been expecting for and yearning for. And therefore, there's no more need for the offering of the sacrifices. Why? Because the one you've been sacrificing to is actually here. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4 says that the Antichrist will exalt himself above all that is called God or that is worshiped, so that he, as God, will sit in the temple of God claiming to be God. This man, a physical human being, will stand in a rebuilt Jewish temple and claim to be God himself. The Bible calls it the abomination of desolation. If you've seen our timelines, it happens exactly halfway through that final 7-year period at the 3.5-year mark. So then, hey, what? Peace at last, right? I mean, much of the world has considered the Palestinian-Israeli strife to be the root cause for much of the conflict around the world. Consequently, when this unprecedented agreement is struck, most of the world's going to rejoice. I mean, they're going to believe that the world has entered into a new era of peace and safety. Nobel Prizes will be awarded. Imagine if Donald Trump were to present the plan. Now, I know that the Bible says he'll confirm the covenant with many. Donald Trump's not the Antichrist. But imagine him presenting the plan, they getting something done, and him being elected to win the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, imagine some of these people that have talked so badly about him having to hand him the Nobel Peace Prize. That would be something to watch right there. But these Nobel Peace Prizes, they'll be awarded to many people probably. And the principal negotiators, they're going to be extolled as these great peacemakers. And when the sharing arrangement on the Temple Mount is implemented, the world will applaud as they see the Jews and Muslims worshiping side by side. I mean, you do that today, and they start throwing rocks, and there's uprisings and all kinds of things. But at that point, that's what's going to happen. And this example of this religious tolerance and coexistence, interfaithism, will be lauded as this new era of religious coexistence to be emulated around the world. And the Jews will move quickly to build their third temple on their portion of the Temple Mount. And the world will watch in wonderment as they witness the construction of the first Jewish temple in 2,000 years. Imagine when you start seeing the foundation for that being laid. You know, I don't think we'll have any problem filling up buses in Jerusalem at that point. We really don't now, but man, I mean, who all will want to go with us on tour when that happens? So, especially because we can see the top of the Dome of the Rock from our Jerusalem Prophecy College. It's going to be pretty awesome. Many Jews believe the building of their temple will signal the coming of the Messiah. Consequently, religious excitement and expectations will be at an unprecedented heights. Well, the problem is, guess what's going to come at the end of this? Armageddon. The euphoria over the peace agreement is going to be short-lived. I mean, when the issue of Jerusalem resurfaces, because the international community already believes that Israel's right to East Jerusalem is illegal, and they're not going to give up East Jerusalem in this peace agreement, Israel's still going to refuse to surrender her beloved city of Jerusalem. The United Nations is going to demand Israel allow the establishment of a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem. And I've actually read, now obviously I haven't read the peace agreement, but I've actually read where they said that Palestinian factions of East Jerusalem now, that Israel would have to pull out of that and allow them to control that. Now again, that's speculation. I have not read the agreement, but there are people that are saying that now. And allowing the Palestinians to have a capital there. I don't know about any of that. We'll have to see what happens in the peace agreement as it's laid out tomorrow. So Israel at that time is going to declare that Jerusalem is her eternal capital and must never be divided or surrendered. She's never going to give it up, regardless of a peace agreement, anything else. Well, at that time, the world community is going to demand that Israel comply with the edicts of the UN, Resolution 2334, or face international forces. And still, Israel is steadfastly going to refuse. And the decision will be made to launch a military invasion to force Israel's submission to the will of the international community. Well, it's clearly prophesied, Zechariah chapter 14:2, for I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. The invasion is going to start in the northern Israel in the plain of Megiddo. That's what will give the battle the name of Armageddon, the hill of Megiddo. And Israel will fight valiantly, but they're going to slowly be driven back by the superior forces of the world community. And finally, the international forces will reach the outskirts of Jerusalem, where Israel will make its last stand, right there between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount. And we're told in Zechariah 14:2 that half of this city shall go forth into captivity. And it's going to appear that Israel's on the brink of being wiped completely off the map. But the God of heaven, that, he's going to have been watching the war against Israel by the Antichrist and his world government. And when Israel's situation looks hopeless, Zechariah 14:3 tells us what's going to happen. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. So Jesus Christ will supernaturally intervene on the side of Israel. He's going to destroy the Antichrist. He's going to remove human governments that have so utterly failed in their efforts to rule the world. And Jesus will establish his kingdom on the earth as described in Revelation 11:15 at the seventh trumpet. The Bible says, and the seventh angel sounded, there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. So that brings us to Trump's peace plan today. You say, well, man, wow, that's a whole lot for me to take in. I mean, for me to be able to explain that to my friends and family. That's why we produce. Now, we've written articles on this for years. We've talked about it. One of the things that you need to be able to explain is the entire prophecy of the peace agreement. That's found in Daniel 9, verses 24 through 27. I only went through Daniel 9:27 today. But to understand Daniel 9:24 through 27, you understand Daniel's 70th week, the gaps, the whole thing. Well, that's why you need to buy this DVD. And honestly, when I was putting this program together today, I wasn't even thinking about this DVD. And Irvin mentioned it this morning in prayer before he went to be with his wife at that surgery. And I thought, man, we've got to mention that today on the radio. Well, as soon as I got back out of the prayer meeting, my wife comes and hands me this DVD and says, we need to show this on air today because People need to be able to explain this. So what a lot of people do, if you can't explain this stuff in great detail, you can't remember all the dates and this, that, and the other, it's best to get a DVD and just show your friends and family, show your pastor, and say, hey, here, there's a final 7-year coming. You may not understand it, maybe you do, but let's watch this. Let's show it to our Bible study. Let's show it to our church for a Wednesday night Bible study. And a lot of pastors will appreciate that, because the prophecy of Daniel 9:24 through 27 is one of the most difficult prophecies to understand in the entire Bible. And so for you to be able to have a DVD that explains the whole thing and the events that will happen during the final 7 years, things leading up to it, man, it's just invaluable. So call in, 1-800-363-8463. Get your copy of the DVD, Final 7 Years, The Prophecy Explained. Because if tomorrow the peace agreement is rolled out, we read through it and we say, oh man, all 5 of the characteristics are laid out here in some form or another. And let's say they were to get it to be signed. Because I promise you, the Palestinians are going to reject it. We know that. But their Arab brethren are going to say, look, you need to get on board. Remember what Prince Salman said to the Palestinians and Abbas back in 2018. You need to get on board with this or shut your mouth and quit complaining about stuff. I mean, these Arab people, they're getting tired of the Palestinians rejecting every opportunity that they've had for decades now. And now Donald Trump has not only said, hey, we're going to give you all of we're going to give you this area, this land and all this other, but he's going to give them all the economic portion of the plan that Jared Kushner presented in June of last year, which would greatly help them. It would bring them from out of a poverty-stricken situation to the point where they could sustain themselves. They're going to build ports and airports and desalination plants, and I mean, to help with their water problem. Israel's mastered that. They're willing to help the Palestinians. And so, man, we could see something happen here before very long. But if you don't know how to explain the prophecy, you're going to be stuck. Because all you're going to do is say, well, these guys on the radio said it. I can't explain it, but, you know, what they said is true. No, you need to be able to explain it. Wouldn't it be nice to have a resource in your hands that you could say, look, watch this DVD and then let's talk about it? That's going to be the easiest way. So the final 7 years, the prophecy explained. Very important. It'll help walk you through all this. It's really a great DVD. And hey, I know along with the rest of you, I'm looking forward tomorrow with the rollout of Donald Trump's peace deal about noon.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of Endtime Ministries. If you're not currently a partner with Endtime Ministries, or if you would like more information, we invite you to call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or visit us online at endtime.com.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page.